So good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Cornell Silicon Valley's Shop Talk featuring Sid Trivedi. It is sponsored by Cornell's West Coast Alumni Affairs team and the Cornell Silicon Valley program. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Nancy Abrams-Dreyer, and I'm the director of the Cornell Silicon Valley program. And our goal today and really every day is to enhance and build the connections among alumni, parents, and friends, specifically from Seattle to San Diego, and then of course around the world. So now onto our program. I'd like to introduce my guest today, Sid Trivedi. Sid earned his bachelor's degree in economics from Cornell in 2013, and he started his career on Wall Street at Barclays Capital, advising on tech, media, and telecom companies. He then moved to the Bay Area, where he joined Symphony Technology Group, a Palo Alto-based private equity firm. At Foundation, Sid invests across the spectrum and helps lead the firm's focus on cybersecurity and works closely with many of their portfolio companies. Outside of work, Sid serves on the advisory board for entrepreneurship at Cornell and serves as a board member for the Cornell Venture Capital Club, which he helped co-found during his time on campus. So Sid, before I launch into some questions, is there anything you'd like to say to the group?
I'm very excited about talking about venture, and even more excited that we have a bunch of Cornellians here.
Great, well, let's get started. I know that your dad worked for Nokia in the early 2000s. How did that experience influence your view of technology?
Yeah, it clearly had a major influence for me. My dad was at Nokia for over 15 years, almost 20 years, actually. I think it was 18 years before he decided to retire. And I think what Nokia and the experience that he had helped me to realize was, I got to see the improvements in technology right from our house, and as he kind of expanded his role within the company. And as the company started to expand, it really changed the way that I thought about technology. Nokia was one of the major companies that went and created the modern mobile phone, and had a major dominance for well over a decade before a number of other manufacturers came out and built out the next generation of smartphones. But the awesome experience was, as a young kid, my dad used to bring new Nokia phones all the time, and Nokia, unlike some of the newer manufacturers today, at the time was launching phones literally every week. There was a new phone with an additional feature, and each of these phones, today's phone, the iPhone, which I use, and some of you may be using Android phones as well, they have a whole suite of services. And that was obviously not the case 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you had a phone that had a specific use case. And over time, each of the additional phones that were released would have additional use cases. So they were critical phones like the Nokia Communicator, which people might remember, which was really the phone that really started off kind of having an office in your wallet with email and some level of Word document capability and PowerPoint viewing. Then you had Engage, which was Nokia's phone that had games on it. It was almost like today's Nintendo Switch. And so I think for me, it was very interesting to see how each of these individual features got added into a specific phone, and being able to access the phone well in advance of it being pushed out to the public. It was a unique experience in understanding how technology would end up changing the world. So you would see a phone, you would get to use it, you'd get to see what the value proposition was, and then 6 months later, it would be launched to the public. And once it got launched, you would see thousands of other people using the phone around you, and the impact that that phone had on those people's lives. So I think for me, the most exciting part was just seeing the impact of this transformation that was happening with mobile phones. The other, I think, side impact was seeing the move from desktop to mobile. In the past, we had seen the revolution of the personal computer, and with mobile phones, you got to see that being maximized 10, 20x across the world. So that was particularly exciting for me. And I think that the one part I'd add, Nancy, maybe is and my dad worked in technology at Nokia, for almost 20 years. My mom coincidentally worked in investment banking. So, with her, I got to see finance and, the impact of how finance used to help to shape markets. And, as a kid, I always thought like both of these areas seem really interesting. I'd love to kind of go and meld them at some point in the future. And in part, I'd say venture gives you that capability today.
I was going to say, look where you are today.
Exactly.
That's fabulous. So you grew up in Singapore. So tell us how you made the decision to go to Cornell and the impact of that decision, kind of as you're now starting to move through life as a young alumnus.
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. One, I think so while I finished my high school in Singapore, and I was certainly there for 10 years, I also lived in a couple of other countries. I was born in India, lived there for the first 7 years of my life. Even in those 7 years, we moved 6 times out of the 7 years to different cities. So it was a lot of movement. Then we moved to Singapore. When we moved to Singapore, it was not common to have lots of expatriates, which are people who are not from Singapore and the region. So it was just, in the 90s, that was not something that happened in Singapore, and you didn't see a lot of people who came from other countries. That obviously has changed today, 20 plus years later. Then we moved to Indonesia, and then we moved back to Singapore. So I ended up finishing school in Singapore. And in fact, my dad's last job was in Finland. And he ended up, because we had moved the family so many times, we ended up all agreeing that he was going to do that remotely, which back then was not considered noble. So he used to fly to Finland every other week. I mean, my dad had a lot of miles in a number of different airlines because of that.
Wow.
But, I think for me, I'd lived in big cities all my life. And what attracted me to Cornell in particular was this opportunity to be in a small college community environment. And it was funny, I was naive about the winter and the impact of the winter. I actually don't think it was as bad as how people describe it. So I enjoyed the remote location of Cornell, and also the fact that there were these differing seasons. I think the second thing that really attracted me to the school was in high school, I really liked economics and biology, and I didn't know what that would mean, but I wanted to kind of go and pursue those two subjects in some level of shape and form. And Cornell had very strong programs in both economics and biology. So I actually started Cornell doing this, double major. And I ended up not finishing my biology major. I did it as a minor only because I decided to finish college a semester early and just do other work and other things. And in addition to that, I didn't want to take genetics. I don't know if there are any bio majors who are on our Zoom session today, but it just didn't seem like a fun subject to do. So I did all of the other requirements except for genetics, and decided it was not worth doing an extra semester for.
Wow, that's great. I know you had a great time on campus, and you immersed yourself in such great programs that really have continued to remain connected to the university today. So that's really great. Can you share a little bit about your early career and how you've made decisions to change jobs along the way? You've only been out of school about 7.5 years, maybe 8 years now, and but you've already launched an incredible career.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's been 8 years, maybe a little bit over 8 years now since I've officially finished the college program and kind of gone through this experience of being in my career. I think certainly Cornell helped at the beginning. So my first job at Barclays was in many ways influenced by the capabilities of Cornell having a great on-campus recruiting program, which made getting that first role a lot easier. And I decided because of the venture capital club that I'd co-founded at Cornell with another close friend of mine who's at another venture firm, that this was something I wanted to do in the future. And back when we had founded the club, which was in 2010, I mean, the concept of having young people in venture just didn't exist. For context, for people who are aware of this, Andreessen Horowitz, which is a well-known venture firm with over 100 people on the team, which is unlike most venture firms, was founded in 2009. So the idea of a venture firm back in 2010 was a couple of people, senior partners, and really no kind of young people on the team. So I never thought of kind of leaving Cornell and going into venture immediately. And I thought maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, that'll be something that's available to me. But I always felt that that would be the end goal. I wanted to kind of get involved in early stage startups. And I've been lucky to kind of work with a number of venture firms because of that role of creating the Cornell Venture Capital Club. And just a 1-minute spiel on what CVC does. It works with venture firms and their portfolio companies on specific projects, real life projects, helping venture firms with diligence, helping them with market analysis, and then helping their portfolio companies with strategy. So I got to experience what it was like being in early stage venture and startup environments. But I didn't think of it as a career option out of college. So I thought, well, what's the best way to kind of get there? And my big learning from speaking with venture capitalists over my time in campus was there were 3 types of ways that you could make it into venture. And they're all connected in that you have to understand what it takes to build a big company. And the 3 ways were, one, you could go into investment banking or consulting, which gave you a sense of what a big company looked like. Because in banking and consulting, you're working with large organizations and you're normally helping them at very, very critical junctures in their lifetime. Public offering, an acquisition, some type of strategic event that's going on. So that was one way. The second way is you found a company and you end up exiting it at over $1 billion in value. And that just seemed, unlikely for a Cornell undergraduate as a path that would be, likely to happen anytime immediately soon. And I didn't have an idea in mind that would kind of, get me excited to do that, take that path. And then the third path was you end up joining a technology company and moving up the ranks into the C-suite. And usually when you retire, you would go into venture. So if you look at partners in venture, they fit into one of those 3 buckets usually. And all those 3 buckets, the main goal is it helps them to understand what scale looks like. And that's really, really important. You have to know what a good company looks like before you can invest in early stage companies. So that was the exciting path. And I decided path 1 was the most likely. And I ended up joining Barclays first to focus on technology. And then more specifically, I ended up kind of focusing on IT and security, which was very random. I ended up kind of focusing on it mostly because it wasn't considered an exciting stage to focus on, both during my summer internship in 2012 and when I started at the firm at the beginning of 2013. So that was the randomness. But I ended up sticking to IT and security and broadly enterprise software, throughout the different roles that I took. First in investment banking, then in private equity, and then obviously today in early stage venture. And the lucky thing is now it's 8+ years of focusing on one sector that has ended up becoming a very important sector of the market.
Yeah,
but hopefully that gives some perspective. Some of it is luck, some of it is thinking through things and getting some advice early on.
Well, I know that at Foundation, you're really proud of and you work really closely on IT, but you've also created this IT and security dinner series. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I know we've had a chance to talk about it in the past, and I think our audience would really like to hear about that and its impact on startups and investors.
Yeah, so I think in early stage venture, it's really, really important to build out a network that allows you to go and source exciting companies. But more importantly, what people forget is it's not just finding exciting companies and investing in them, but also helping them along the way. And in enterprise software, and very specifically in IT, which is the middleware and infrastructure stack of enterprise software, one of the most important things that you can do is help startups find their first 5 to 10 customers. I mean, that is the most difficult path. The reason that an individual customer is so important in enterprise software and broadly IT and security is because usually one customer in enterprise that sells to large enterprises ends up being worth 6-figure or 7-figure in dollars per year to the vendor, to the startup. So these are large deals. It's not like having myself or Nancy as customers where we're spending a couple of dollars. These customers, if they end up getting excited, can end up making or breaking a startup. And because, as I mentioned in the earlier question, Nancy, I've spent most of my time since leaving Cornell focused on IT and security. I've been lucky to kind of build out a network. And what was very lucky was obviously spending time on one area, but what was even more lucky was that area wasn't that big when I started looking at it and has ended up becoming very, very big over the last decade. So there was a whole set of people that I got to meet early on in my career who have ended up becoming very, very significant people in the business today. And it's really bringing that network both to the startups that are in our portfolio, as well as to startups that I'm looking at, to be able to show where do we have distinguished value, where can we give them an unfair advantage versus other investors. And the part that I like to remind people is in today's environment, I think this is a question that people have for me, but in today's environment, capital and particularly equity capital is relatively cheap at all stages of investing. But what is much more harder to figure out is what is the unique value that you get in addition to the dollars that you are giving to a startup.
And a lot of it's about the people. It's the product,
Sure.
but it's also about the people. So you've
Absolutely
done an incredible job of being able to establish that network and share it with others. I mean, I've got a huge list of questions and I could go on for a long time, but I'm going to ask you one more question and then I'm going to open it to the audience and I can fill in as necessary. I think obviously the big elephant in the room is COVID-19, and hopefully, we're starting to see a light at the tunnel. You and I have spoken a lot about, what that timeline looks like, and I'm not really sure that anybody can give us that answer. But how has the pandemic impacted your firm and and the companies it invests in and how it's thinking about its investment? Just give us kind of a broad overview of the effect of the pandemic, because it's far from over.
Yeah. I think there's multiple different things that the pandemic has caused from a change in strategy perspective. One, I would say it has changed the way that we diligence companies. And for us at Foundation, we are very focused on early stage venture. So typically when we invest in a company, there's anywhere between 2 to 30 people on the team at time of our initial investment. And if things work out and our companies are successful, those companies go from 2 to 30 people to thousands of people. And so at the time that we're investing, one of the biggest factors that we are trying to assess is this the group of 2 to 30 people that can go and build a company that ends up going public on the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. And it's very hard to assess that on Zoom. It's incredibly difficult to make that assessment. So it has changed the way that we diligence our founders, and we've had to adjust. And I think we are still in the process of figuring out what is the best way of assessing people virtually. To the extent possible, we try to meet them. There's ways to do socially distant walks out here in the Bay Area, but the risk that runs is, it confines us to just the Bay Area. It's very difficult to travel right now, even more so than it was pre-COVID. It was always annoying to take a couple of days off if you have hundreds of meetings going on and travel to another region. But now it's actually difficult to do so with the restrictions of COVID. So it's changed the way that we diligence our companies. And I think what this means is we end up doing more meetings virtually with the same set of founders before we make a decision. We try to do them in the same timeline, but we're doing more meetings before we make that decision so that we can try to assess people And we've tried different ways of trying to do these meetings. We've had meetings where we haven't focused on the idea that they are building and more focused on their lives and what makes it interesting for them to pursue this opportunity. But the conversational part of getting to know someone is harder to do, and I don't want to kind of hide from that. The second thing I think that we have had to adjust is how we as partners are able to work more so as a team. I think this is well known, but for most venture firms, once a week, they come together as a team and spend time, try to figure out what the best way to kind of grow a business is. And what are the specific topics of the specific companies, both in our portfolio and new opportunities that we're excited about, we should be kind of focusing on. That is just hard to do in this virtual environment. Those discussions that you have as you're walking down the hallway just aren't happening. So the way we've changed that is, instead of having just one partnership meeting day, which is on Monday, we've added two. We've broken it up. So we have Mondays and Thursdays, and we spend a little bit more time virtually together. But I don't want to hype that that it's easy to do this. And then I think the third thing that we have been trying to figure out is, what is a good way for us to go and source new company opportunities? The reason that this is important is, in the past, we would go to a certain set of events. For example, the event that we're having right now virtually would have been in person. So I would have had an opportunity to meet each of you. And if you're going and building a company, it would be an easy way to introduce yourself. All of that is gone. And now, particularly right as the pandemic was starting, there was some level of complexity around finding founders who didn't have an immediate connectivity into our firm, i.e. they didn't know someone who knew us, who could broker an introduction. So I think the way that we have changed things is we've built out more of an outbound strategy, where we are actively going and reaching out to founders that we're excited about. We were always doing that, but I think we're doing that even more so than we were in the past. We've also increased the number of large-scale events we do. It's hard to do these small events a lot, and I try to do as many office hours as I can. But we've increased the number of large-scale events. And I'll give an example. At the end of last year, we made a big decision to go and create this virtual enterprise conference and get over 1,000 attendees join us. So basically what we said was, let's go and try to find people who would not have access to Foundation otherwise, who we would usually have met at an event somewhere throughout the year. But I think it's been a change in each stage of our decision-making, diligencing the companies, making the final decision, and figuring out which ones to pursue, and then sourcing. And I expect that to continue to change. Obviously, our hope is that at some point we will be able to go back to in-person, and I expect as venture firms, we will be one of the first to kind of restart operations, because it is a very important part of how we do business, being able to meet the founders that we are excited about and spend time with them before we make a decision. But until then, we figured out ways to manage. And while it's not all perfect, we're constantly trying to find ways to improve.
So Sid, has being online, and now that your full team is meeting twice a week, how has it impacted the timing? Like, are you making as many investments, in this year that you typically would, or is it slowing down the process? What does the pacing look like?
Yeah, so we were one of the few firms that didn't stop investing last year. There was a whole set of our peers who stopped investing for a period of roughly 3 months between March and May, where they just didn't do any new investments. They had a decision that no new investments are being made. We will only focus on portfolio. We had a perspective based on looking at past viruses, as well as looking at other regions that had gone through the COVID pandemic during the earlier months of 2020. And our view was, this is going to be something that lasts a few weeks, at most a few months. And it's funny that I admit that to you, just given that now we're about to go into our first full anniversary of being in lockdown here in the Bay Area. So that was part of the reason why we didn't stop investing. And when we look at kind of 2020, we have continued our pace. as normal as possible. And into 2021, our strategy is to remain the same and continue to invest in just as many companies. I think for our peers, the reason they stopped investing for 3 months last year, and that may have changed the pacing of how they do investments, particularly in 2020, was they had a view that things were going to last for longer. And while they were right, I think what none of us predicted was the enormous amount of fiscal and monetary policy that was executed not just by the US government, but by global governments to keep the economy running across the world. And that basically meant that the stock market that all of us as retail investors can look at, but also other markets, the debt market, the private investing market, maintained its trajectory of continuing to go up and to the right. And while some of it is artificial, it basically meant that if you had stopped investing for 3 months, you lost out on an opportunity when valuations did decrease. I mean, we made 3 investments in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown, and all those valuations were significantly lower. And all those companies are performing extremely well, and we came in at a unique position.
Well, all of those companies were you're probably also already in conversation with them. I want to point out, so Arjan put a question in the chat, and it's kind of a 3-point question here. In evaluating a new investment, how do you weight the founders / their team against the underlying technology and the uniqueness of the problem or solution?
Yeah. So Arjun, I think that the answer depends on what stage the company is at. I will focus it in more so on early stage, but if the question is more so on growth stage, just let me know, and I'm obviously happy to adjust as needed. But maybe before I kind of answer the specific question, I'll say there's a few criteria that all investors and venture investors look for. So they're trying to evaluate team, market, product, and what we can call metrics, or level of interest by the market, the customer base. So it's one of those 4 things. And in the early stages of a business, the focus is very much so on the first 2, team and market. And then as the business has a product, you can evaluate product. And as the business starts to get customers, you can evaluate metrics or traction. I'd say for us at the very early stage, which is seed and early Series A investing, we weigh both team and market pretty equally. Depending on the individual, one will weigh more over the other. For me personally, I spend a lot of time thinking about markets and sub-markets. So having a market that is incredibly exciting to go after at the right initiation point is very critical for me. Obviously, having a team that has equivalent experience is relevant, but sometimes a team may be missing or lacking certain criteria. But if the market is exciting, it's an interesting entry point, I'll make that exception. I think when you can evaluate product, for me, the most important thing is being able to understand why a customer would like that specific product over any existing products that may exist or could exist in the future. So what makes that product really tick? And then when there's traction, we can go into lots of detail on key metrics and things that people look for at different stages. But those are more, those are well written in other blogs, and we are able to kind of look into them in a lot more detail. But I think that to kind of summarize, Arjun, those 4 things are always important, but at minimum, one of them has to be incredibly special. Either the team is very special, the market entry point is incredibly unique, the product has some edge, or it has amazing traction. One of those 4 has to really shine for an investment to get done.
Oh, Sal has a great question here. So how do you deal with a startup that can be a potential or direct competitor to a company that's already in your portfolio? Yeah,
so I think Sal, the answer is dependent on whether it's potential or direct. Direct competitors, we don't invest a new startup as a direct competitor to an existing company. If it's a potential competitor, the question is always, well, when will the paths cross? If the answer is the paths will cross in 6 to 12 months, then effectively it's a direct competitor. If the answer is, hey, the paths may cross in 5+ years, well, that's very hard to make that assessment. And many times, I'll get a view from one of my existing companies that, hey, we could be competitive. And my push to the founder is always, well, when do you think you'll be competitive? And which part of the business do you think will be competitive? Because ultimately, as a cybersecurity company, you could technically become competitive with any other cybersecurity company in the future. So trying to understand, well, when will this happen, or how likely is it to happen, is really important. And if the answer is that, hey, this could happen in 5+ years, then that's still very much a valid investment to make.
Aaron entered a question into the chat, wanting your advice for someone trying to break into VC who doesn't fit into one of your 3 paths that you laid out earlier on.
Yeah. So you don't have to, you're not required to fit into one of the 3 paths. I'll give you an example of, a person who didn't fit into one of the 3 paths. And there are many others, but I'll start with one example. Mike Moritz, who was one of the senior partners at Sequoia Capital. Mike, he had a background as a reporter. He was a reporter, and I think how he learned about understanding how companies and founders operate at scale was interviewing people. I mean, he was lucky to go and interview, individuals like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates well before they became famous. And that gave him a sense of understanding what scale looked like. So that's certainly possible. And since then, there are a number of reporters that have gone on to be venture capitalists, even ones that have joined very recently. So it's not in any way a requirement to be in one of the 3 buckets. I think what's more important is, do you have a sense for what a big company looks like and what it takes to become a big company? That really ends up being very, very important. And I'll be more specific for me with security in particular. I was lucky to be at Barclays at a time when we helped to take FireEye public, when we helped to take SourceFire public, when we helped to take Palo Alto Networks public. Those 3 companies are major companies in cybersecurity today. FireEye, coincidentally, just acquired by one of my companies at the end of last year. They're all massive businesses, with well over 400-500 million in revenue, annual revenue. So it helped me to understand what scale looks like and what are the things that can go right and what are the things that can go wrong. And if there are other ways that you can figure that out, that's great. But I think what's really important is being able to, in some way, assess why a big company is successful.
Jeff wanted to know what public companies you do view as good investments in cybersecurity. So you might want to reiterate some of those that you just mentioned, or maybe add some others.
The companies that I think are phenomenal businesses run by very successful CEOs. CrowdStrike has consistently built out a business. George and Dimitri, the founders there, are fantastic people, and I believe that company will continue to build out. What makes them so unique is their software plus services strategy. So I think that's a very exciting company to continue to follow. I think Palo Alto Networks has constantly innovated itself. It has gone from being a firewall security company to being a cloud security company to today looking like it will become an application security company. And being able to make those changes consistently is very unique. And then the last one I'll mention, Splunk. I think Doug Merritt, who's the CEO there, is a fantastic operator. And when he joined, the company was valued at about 5 or 6 billion and did just security. And today the company is worth well over 30 billion. In fact, until its most recent drop in its stock price, it was worth over 40 billion. And the way he's done that is he's expanded his market size from just security and just one part of security into IT and then subsequently into engineering through multiple different use cases. But the high level point I'll say is I think this sector overall will continue to see massive increase in value. It's one of those sectors where it's very hard to go wrong if you are playing a long game.
So Sid, we only have a couple minutes left, so I'm going to close with one last question. Can you talk a little bit about your view of the impact that the new Biden administration might have on the tech community?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question, Nancy. I think so. So the early indication is that it will only be a positive impact, and we'll see. Kind of, there are still questions that people have. There's a question around privacy law and how that may change under the Biden administration. There's a question around monopolies and how the Biden administration is going to think about monopolistic situations in technology. And whether that's positive or negative for the sector is unclear right now. What is clear is that the administration does consider technology to be an integral value point for growth in the US economy. So that is very, very important, and that's necessary for sure. You want an administration that thinks about this sector as being important to the overall growth of GDP in the nation. I think if I was to be specific around security, just given it's a big topic, given the number of large attacks that have happened, the most recent being a hack on SolarWinds, and it's one of its products, Orion, which has impacted a number of different companies, including most of the large defense agencies in the United States. I think the administration cares a lot more about cybersecurity and potential impact of cyber warfare and how that may change the US's unique position as a leader in creating technology innovation. So I think across a number of different things, it's very positive to see that there's an administration that thinks that technology will actually, overall be a net positive for all people in the nation. And secondly, also recognizes the risk of technology. And cyber is obviously one potential risk. What has happened in the world today is we have taken all of our physical valued assets, whether that be money, what we consider valuable. In the past, we used to consider things to be valuable. Now we consider software to be valuable. Just think about games you used to play, sports you used to play as kids, versus now playing virtual games and having a certain character and a certain level, the amount of time and effort and money you put into those. So a lot of our value has moved from the physical world to the digital world. So the way that we protect that digital world has ended up being very important, both as enterprises, as large organizations that we all trust, as well as nations. And I think how the administration thinks about cybersecurity and cybersecurity risk going into the future is going to be really, really important.
Great. Well, Sid, I wish we had more time, but we have come to the end of our shop talk for today. I'd like to thank you and everybody for joining us. Until we meet again, stay healthy and safe.